He wasn't just a wrestler. He was the law. Ray Traylor, known to millions as Big Boss Man, stormed into the ring like a juggernaut in a correctional officer's uniform. Armed with a nightstick and a no-nonsense attitude, he wasn't playing a character. He was the authority. A brutal enforcer who dragged opponents to justice in the squared circle. But behind the badge and the blue shirt was a man waging war with something far more dangerous than any wrestling rival: his own body. Standing 6'6" and tipping the scales at over 300 pounds, Big Boss Man was a sight to behold. He defied expectations with surprising agility for a man his size, becoming one of the most unique powerhouses of his time. His signature matches weren't just fights. They were full-blown events: steel cage showdowns, handcuff matches, and hardcore brawls where he dished out pain like it was part of his job description. But the high-impact style and massive frame that made him a fan favorite came at a cost. Ray Traylor's body, built for dominance, wasn't built to endure decades of abuse. Behind the scenes, every slam, dive, and sprint across the ring chipped away at his health. This wasn't just wear and tear. It was a slow-motion breakdown. We'll dive into the rise of a Southern kid who made it big, the physical punishment he endured, and how it all led to a tragic end. This is a story of success, sacrifice, and the silent damage fame can bring. Have you ever wondered what it truly costs to be a wrestling legend? You're about to find out. Before he was the Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor was just a small-town guy from Marietta, Georgia. A former prison guard, he took his real-life job experience and transformed it into one of the most unforgettable characters in wrestling history. But his journey to superstardom didn't happen overnight. Ray started his wrestling career in the mid-1980s as Big Bubba Rogers in Jim Crockett Promotions. Dressed in a suit and silent behind his sunglasses, he played the heavy for the legendary Jim Cornette. Even back then, his size and speed made him stand out. It wasn't long before the WWF came knocking. In 1988, he made his debut as Big Boss Man, this time in full correctional officer gear. Managed by Slick, he instantly became a heel with real heat. Audiences booed, but they couldn't take their eyes off him. He wasn't just big, he was fast. He moved around the ring like a man half his size, catching opponents off guard and turning matches into absolute chaos. One of his earliest standout moments came when he handcuffed Hulk Hogan to the steel cage and left him helpless. That moment alone elevated him from just another bad guy to a serious threat. His feuds with Hogan, Dusty Rhodes, and the Mountie cemented his status as one of the top villains of his era. He later formed the powerhouse tag team, the Twin Towers, with Akeem, and together they dominated opponents in the late 80s. Whether as a solo star or part of a tag team, Boss Man made sure fans remembered him. As the early 90s rolled in, he underwent a babyface turn, shifting from corrupt prison guard to tough, but fair, lawman. This version of Big Boss Man resonated even more with fans. He became a hero to the younger audience, fighting for justice in and out of the ring. But while the cheers got louder, the grind got harder. Ray's wrestling schedule barely allowed time to recover. Night after night, city after city, his massive frame took hit after hit. And it didn't help that during this period, he began wrestling in more physically brutal matches, some involving nightsticks, steel cages, and handcuffs. Still, he pushed on. He was on top of the world, both professionally and financially. But that success came with a ticking clock. His body was already giving warning signs, and no amount of crowd support could protect him from what was coming. Before we dive into the brutal impact wrestling had on Big Boss Man's health, I want to remind you, don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the video. It really helps the channel grow, and there's a lot more coming just like this. To understand the toll wrestling took on Big Boss Man, you first have to understand what his job really entailed. While fans saw a larger-than-life enforcer bringing justice to the ring, behind the scenes, Ray Traylor was part of one of the most punishing professions on the planet. And when you're 6'6" and sashing 300 pounds and wrestling night after night, your body pays a very steep price. The wrestling business in the 80s and 90s wasn't a part-time gig. Wrestlers were on the road up to 300 days a year, barely any time to heal, let alone rest. That kind of schedule would push even the most physically gifted athletes to the brink. For Ray, it was a slow but steady breakdown. Ankles, knees, shoulders, everything started wearing down under the constant pressure. Yet, night after night, he kept going. Ray's in-ring style was incredibly physical. He took pride in his ability to move quickly and hit hard, often diving across the ring or lifting other super heavyweights with raw power. These weren't light moves. Every single performance was a collision course of weight, velocity, and repetition. Bones don't forget impacts like that. Muscles tear, joints grind, internal damage starts to settle in and linger. In matches involving steel cages, weapons, and no disqualification rules, the damage amplified. Boss Man was frequently booked in matches that blurred the line between sport and spectacle. And when you throw your body into cages or take hits with real nightsticks, even as part of a scripted fight, you don't walk away unscathed. Back then, the culture was walk it off. There was no real recovery time, no consistent medical oversight. The mindset was simple: show up and wrestle. As the years wore on, Ray's size started working against him. Carrying 300-plus pounds day in and day out began to take a toll on his cardiovascular system and his joints. The long flights, poor sleep, lack of proper nutrition, and ongoing physical trauma all compounded the stress his body endured. He tried to adapt by changing his wrestling style slightly over time, relying less on high-impact movements and more on brawling tactics. But the damage had already been done. What made things worse was the silent expectation in wrestling locker rooms. Never let anyone see you hurt. Protect the business. Stay in character. Don't admit when you're in pain. That's exactly what Ray did. He pushed through match after match, often working through sprains, fractures, and even concussions without ever stepping back. That silent suffering became his routine. Even when he returned to WWE in the late 90s during the Attitude Era, his matches became even more extreme. He was involved in infamous storylines like dragging Big Show's father's casket behind a truck. Fans remember the spectacle. But behind the scenes, these moments required a level of physical commitment that most can't imagine. Falls, stunts, and chair shots were not just storytelling devices. They were punishments his body had to absorb. By the early 2000s, the wear showed. His movements were slower. He took longer to get up. The Boss Man character remained strong, but the man behind it was struggling. It wasn't just about aging. It was the accumulated damage of living like a battering ram for decades. Ray Traylor gave wrestling everything. But wrestling rarely gives back. And for the Big Boss Man, his body, once his greatest weapon, had turned into his greatest weakness. As Ray Traylor's career progressed, the pain from years in the ring wasn't just physical. It began seeping into his personal life. The same determination that made him power through grueling matches also made him ignore warning signs that something far worse was happening inside his body. After decades of taking beatings for the crowd's entertainment, Ray's health began to unravel behind closed doors. He battled chronic joint pain that limited his mobility. Everyday tasks like getting out of bed or climbing stairs became labors of effort. But it wasn't just sore muscles and stiff legs. Ray was dealing with internal damage. There were signs of heart trouble, something that would haunt him in the years to come. Beyond the physical agony, there was a growing sense of mental exhaustion. Wrestlers often talk about the crash that comes when the arena lights dim and the crowd stops cheering. For Ray, that crash hit hard. He spent years in constant motion, living in hotel rooms and eating whatever he could find at 1 a.m. on the road. The lack of structure and rest caught up with him, especially once his spotlight began to fade. In 2002, tragedy struck in a different way. Ray was riding his motorcycle when he collided with a deer, a brutal accident that left him with multiple injuries and forced him to slow down. The crash wasn't just a physical blow, it was an emotional one. For a man who had always been able to rely on his body to get through anything, the crash was a jarring reminder that even he wasn't invincible. The accident forced him to take a long, painful look at his lifestyle. He began pulling back from wrestling, opting for a quieter life, with his family in Georgia, He opened a storage business and even flirted with local politics. Friends said he was trying to build a new chapter, one away from the bright lights and brutal schedule. But even in semi-retirement, the damage was already too deep. That same year, Ray lost one of his closest friends, Kurt Hennig, better known as Mr. Perfect. Kurt died suddenly of acute cocaine intoxication in a hotel room during a wrestling tour. For Ray, it was a devastating loss. The two had spent years together in the locker room, traveling city to city and forming a brotherhood forged by blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Kurt's death rocked Ray emotionally and mentally. It was another reminder that their generation of wrestlers was disappearing, many of them well before their time. Despite trying to focus on his health, Ray continued to struggle with complications linked to years of physical punishment. His heart, in particular, showed signs of stress. At over 300 pounds and with years of untreated injuries, high blood pressure, and the residual effects of wrestling, his body was on a dangerous path. There were rumors that he tried various medications and treatments, but nothing seemed to offer long-term relief. Friends later revealed that Ray rarely talked about his pain. He was proud, tough, and didn't like showing vulnerability. That stoic attitude, while admirable in the ring, may have contributed to him avoiding the medical care he desperately needed. Instead of resting, he kept moving forward, driven by a lifetime of conditioning to just deal with it. Family became his priority in his final years. He loved being around his wife and daughters, trying to make up for the time wrestling had stolen. But even then, it was hard for him to stay still. He was wired to perform, to protect, to provide. Slowing down didn't come naturally. Behind the scenes, those close to Ray started noticing changes. He seemed tired more often, less energetic, and slower in conversation. Still, he brushed it off. To the outside world, Big Boss Man was still larger than life. But inside, Ray Traylor was fading. What hurts the most is knowing that he tried. He truly tried to step away, to live a normal life, to enjoy the peace he'd earned. But the years in the ring had left behind invisible scars, and the man, once seen as indestructible, was quietly falling apart. On September 22, 2004, the wrestling world was hit with a gut punch. Ray Traylor, the man millions knew as Big Boss Man, died suddenly at his home in Dallas, Georgia. He was only 41 years old. The cause? A heart attack. Swift, unexpected, and devastating. The news sent shockwaves through the wrestling community. Although fans knew he had stepped away from the ring, few realized how serious his health issues had become. His death wasn't the result of a single injury or a tragic accident in the ring. It was the culmination of years of physical strain, untreated damage, and internal stress that finally reached a breaking point. Those closest to Ray were heartbroken, but not entirely surprised. The signs had been there: shortness of breath, extreme fatigue, weight issues, but Ray had always brushed them off. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted to be seen as strong, as capable, as the same unstoppable force he'd been for decades. That pride, that iron will, it was part of what made him a star, but it also kept him from asking for help. His passing was especially tragic because he was finally starting to enjoy life away from the spotlight. He was spending more time with his daughters, reconnecting with his roots, and investing in his community. Ray had done the impossible. He walked away from wrestling and found something resembling peace. But that peace didn't last long. Tributes poured in from fans and fellow wrestlers. WWE aired a tribute video, and wrestlers like Mick Foley, The Undertaker, and Triple H shared personal stories about Ray's kindness, loyalty, and humor. He wasn't just respected, he was loved. Behind the tough guy persona was a man with a huge heart who always made time for his friends. In a cruel twist of fate, the very heart that made him such a beloved figure is what ultimately failed him. But make no mistake, Ray Traylor didn't fade into obscurity. He left behind a legacy of grit, character, and unmatched presence. His death served as a wake-up call within the wrestling industry, highlighting the long-term health risks wrestlers face, even years after they've retired. For many, Ray's passing was more than just the loss of a colleague. It was the loss of a brother. Though Ray Traylor left this world far too soon, the impression he made in professional wrestling is anything but forgotten. His character, Big Boss Man, remains one of the most iconic gimmicks from an era filled with unforgettable personalities. He wasn't flashy or overly theatrical, he was believable. He brought grit and realism to a world often filled with over-the-top personas. In 2016, Ray received one of wrestling's highest honors, induction into the WWE Hall of Fame. The ceremony was emotional, with his family accepting the award on his behalf. Fans old and new were reminded of just how important Big Boss Man was to the WWE's golden age. His contributions weren't just in the ring, they were foundational to the company's storytelling and locker room culture. Ray had a rare ability to evolve with the business. Whether playing a villain in the late 80s or a hard-nosed fan favorite in the early 90s, he brought authenticity to every performance. Even during the edgier Attitude Era, he reinvented himself to stay relevant, aligning with factions like the Corporation and participating in storylines that pushed creative boundaries. That adaptability earned him respect from peers and audiences alike. His influence can still be seen in modern wrestling. Wrestlers today who use law enforcement or authority-based characters owe a creative debt to Big Boss Man. He paved the way for that type of role to be taken seriously in a wrestling environment. His signature look, badge, nightstick, and mirrored sunglasses became instantly recognizable and is still used in tributes and homages by fans and fellow performers. Outside of character, Ray was known for his loyalty, mentorship, and willingness to help younger talent. Many wrestlers credit him with offering guidance during tough tours or chaotic locker rooms. He never looked down on anyone and treated every job with dignity, whether opening a show or headlining. Ray Traylor's story is bittersweet. He reached the heights of fame, suffered in silence, and passed before his time. But his legacy? That's carved in stone. Big Boss Man was more than a wrestling character. He was a cornerstone of an era, a symbol of toughness, and a man whose presence is still felt today. Ray Traylor's life is a reminder that strength comes in many forms. In the ring, he was a powerhouse, intimidating, relentless, and fiercely committed to his character. Outside of it, he was a man fighting through pain, loss, and the harsh aftermath of a career that demanded everything. His story is as much about resilience as it is about tragedy. Big Boss Man entertained millions. He made us cheer, boo, laugh, and even feel fear. But behind the spectacle was a human being, a husband, a father, a friend who gave more than he ever received in return. He didn't chase fame for the spotlight. He chased it because it was his job, and he took pride in doing it well. What's heartbreaking is how common stories like his are in professional wrestling. Performers sacrifice their health, families, and futures for our entertainment. Ray Traylor paid that price. And while his legacy lives on in Hall of Fame, plaques, highlight reels, and fan memories, it's important we don't forget the man behind the badge. He was more than a gimmick. He was the real deal. He left us with unforgettable moments, dragging caskets, swinging nightsticks, delivering justice in the most dramatic ways possible. But he also left us with a powerful lesson. Even the strongest people need help sometimes. Even giants fall. What's even more striking is that Ray never sought sympathy. He never played the victim. Even as his health declined and his world got quieter, he stayed proud. That's what makes this story hit even harder. He carried the weight of 1,000 matches on his back and never asked for a lighter load. He didn't want anyone to see him as anything less than the Big Boss Man. But he was more than that. He was a symbol of dedication, loyalty, and grit. His story also challenges us to think deeper about what we ask of our heroes. Wrestling fans celebrate toughness, and we should, but at what cost? Behind every steel chair and piledriver, there's a toll. It's easy to forget that when the lights go out and the cameras stop rolling, These athletes go home with real injuries and real consequences. So, here's a question for you. How many other wrestling icons are silently suffering behind the characters we love? How many are smiling through pain, hiding their struggles just to protect the image fans remember? Ray Traylor's journey reminds us that legacy isn't just about what you do. It's also about how you're remembered. He didn't just play a role, he lived it. He owned it. And now, it's up to us to make sure his legacy doesn't fade. If this video gave you a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices these performers make, I'd be incredibly grateful if you hit that subscribe button. We're building a community that honors wrestling's past, tells the stories that matter, and respects the people behind the personas. Your support helps us grow, and there's so much more to come. Thank you for sticking with me through this emotional ride. Whether you grew up watching Big Boss Man or just discovered his story today, I hope it made you think and feel. Ray Traylor deserves to be remembered not just for the character he played, but for the courage he showed every single day. This wasn't just a story about wrestling. It was a story about sacrifice, about pushing through pain, and about finding meaning even in struggle. And most of all, it's a story about a man who gave everything he had to entertain the world. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and each other, and each other.